So, ladies and gentlemen, in the top right-hand corner, it's me, and I'm Peter from AJS. And in the centre, in the middle there, we have Kirra-Lea Caynes. And Kirra-Lee is going to do a demonstration today as an introduction to sand casting. But before we do, Kirra-Lee, people might be impressed by my background. And the reason they're impressed is because it actually is a piece that you created in 2019, which won you Jeweller of the Year for Australia.
Yep.
Yeah. It very much deserves a round of applause. Kirra-Lee, could you just give the viewers a little bit of a background to that piece? It's an amazing piece.
Thank you. Well, it's called plumage because it's meant to look like peacock feather. And it's using tourmaline, different shades of tourmaline to try and blend the colors and make it look like a peacock feather. And it's got the cabochon topazes reverse set. And then a plate has been laser soldered behind it, so you can't even tell how it's been set. So I don't know if that was like one of the little things that like allowed me to win, but it's something I'm particularly proud of.
Well, the colours are amazing, and it's beautiful. It's so beautiful in so many ways. So I'm sure people will be very impressed as they watch our demo this morning.
Yes.
So would you just like to outline what we're going to do today in our introduction to sand casting?
Yes. So we're going to do just basic mold making. I'm going to be showing you how to use just the regular flask that you would get from any of the suppliers that supply the Delft clay, except there's a little bit of a twist to it. I've modified mine so that I can not only cast with it horizontal, I can cast with it vertical as well. So I'm just going to run through some really basic things, starting off with just sand casting a pendant, and then I'll show you how to sand cast two like little earrings together, but with just one pouring, one cast, one mold. So you you get double results. And then I will move on to showing you how to cast a ring. And I prefer to cast rings in a vertical style. So the last demonstration, if everything goes well, we'll be using this flask in a vertical manner.
Beautiful. I look forward to that.
Sorry, I'm talking. Sorry. I have
watching yourself.
Gardeners here today asking me questions. Alrighty. So I guess we should start, right?
That'd be great.
Fantastic. So I'm just realized my flask was a little bit loose, so it wasn't tightly fitting together. So you've got to make sure that your flask is always a little bit tight, a little bit sticky. Otherwise, you run the risk of the metal popping the flask apart. So it's always a good idea to make sure it's a little bit tight. And I'm just hammering the edge down a little bit. There we go. That's better. Alrighty. So before we start, I'll just show you a few of the tools that I'll be using. So we've got a metal straw, which is perfect for when we're using the flask in a horizontal manner, which is what we'll be doing first up. I've got a little, like a fat poker tool. I've got a sharp poker tool. I've got a paintbrush, which has two functions. I sort of use the back of it like a rolling pin. I use the front to apply talcum powder. I've got some tweezers in case I need to do any like fine work. I've got a knifey tool for carving out funnels, a ruler that has multiple functions, talcum powder, and I've got the chasing hammer. It doesn't have to be anything expensive. I've just got the student version, but it's perfect because it's got a big head on it, so you don't have to do as much smashing. And of course, as you can see on the other camera, I've got my Delft clay here, my flask, and you will have to have a crucible, and preferably a crucible with a handle. It's a lot safer, and you need oxygen and gas. It just gets hot enough. You can't really get away with casting if you've just got the butane bottle, unfortunately. Alrighty, so let us begin. So I've got my two halves. I've got my male half and my female half. So the male half is the one with the exposed lip, The female is the part that has the recessed lip. We always start on the male. We put him lip down. You'll be able to see on the other camera that I'm putting him lip down, and I'm packing him from behind with the clay. So I'm just literally forcing the clay in there. And now I'm going to get my hammer and I'm going to compress all of that. So the main reason why we're packing this from behind and hammering it from behind is because you're hitting this aluminium frame with your hammer and you'll eventually distort it. If you were to be hitting on the lip, it means that your two clay halves, your two molds won't fit back together because you'll damage that lip. So if we bang it from behind on the back of your mold, it's going to make your mold last a lot longer. I've got my ruler and I'm just cutting off any excess clay that was on the back of it, because we want this to be flush. We don't want it to be proud and rolling around. We don't want it to be recessed, flush. I've flipped it over now because the side with the lip is the side that we're going to be using. I've got my talcum powder. I'm going to put a little bit of talcum powder on that clay surface. You do this so that your two clay halves don't stick together. It also helps your object come out of the clay a lot better. So just for this first one, I'm going to be using this little pendenty thing. Show you the other camera, maybe it can see it better. Not really.
Yeah.
I picked this up from an op shop. It's pretty much plastic, but it's got a really interesting pattern to it. So I'm just going to pop that into my clay, roughly in the middle. I'm going to use my ruler to help me push that into the clay about halfway. So the harder you compact your clay, the harder it is for you to push your object into the clay. So keep that in mind. If you're casting with organics, you know, a shell that might break if you apply too much pressure, don't pack your clay as hard. All right, so I've just pushed that into about halfway. That's it there. All right, I'm going to put a little bit of talcum powder on the top of that pendant design, just because it's got a little bit of a textured pattern on it, and I don't want the clay to get stuck in it. I want it to pull apart nice and evenly. I'm going to get my female and I'm going to pop her on top. I'm going to line up those registration marks. In this case, my registration marks are actually this giant hole I've cut in the side of it. But for these first few castings, we're going to ignore the giant hole. I'm going to refer to it as the registration mark. All right, I'm going to get some loose crumbly clay and I'm going to start filling that flask. You can only ever fill the female half of your flask once she's on top of her male partner. You can't pack her separately. So she always has to be on her male partner. All right, now I'm going to use my hammer and I'm going to compress that clay. With a hard object like this, I can go to town hammering it. And actually, the harder I hammer it, the crisper or detail I'm going to get. You might not be able to hammer things as hard or organics and fragile because you might break them. All right, you're going to get dirty too. Now I'm going to pull apart my flask. I'm not going to twist it open. I'm going to pull it apart nice and evenly. I don't want to disturb the negative space I've just made. So I'm going to pull it apart nice and evenly. And there we go. So my object has moved to the female side, where originally I put it in the male side. So I don't know if you can see, not very well. Oh, there we go. You can see that detail a little bit there. So it has picked up an incredible amount of detail. Maybe I can try and show this other camera. There we go. Amazing amount of detail. All right, well, let's get this object out of the clay. I'm going to pull it out with some tweezers. Another reason why tweezers come in handy, because fingers make a mess. All right. Now, I need to have a way for the silver to get inside of this negative space I've just created. So unfortunately, I will have to mess with the pattern on one side and just in a little section. So have a little look at your design, have a bit of a perv on it and decide which side you think is the most attractive, the side you want to see. The side you want to see, you're going to leave alone. I've decided I'm going to molest this side. And this is where the straw comes in handy. So it's metal straw. I'm going to use it like an apple corer. And that also helps so that my sprue is going to be perfect and round, so that when I go to clean everything back, I can leave just a little bit of that sprue there, and it can act like a little plaque where I can put my stamps on it, which can look really crisp and cool. All right, I've decided I'm going to apple core right there. So I'll just make a little mark and then I'll show you guys. See where that circle is? That's where I'm going to put my sprue hole, and that's going to go straight through this flask, and it has to be in the impression of your object. It can't be near it or beside it, has to be directly in it. I know it's like counterintuitive. You don't want to wreck this perfect impression, but you have to. Otherwise, you won't have anything to work with. So sacrifices. Alrighty, so I'm just going to push that straw all the way through. There we go. And that has apple cord. A nice, beautiful sprue for us. But it doesn't stop there. We still have to do a little bit more work. Now we've got knifey tool. We're going to flip this flask over and we're going to carve a funnel where that hole is. We need this funnel to be fairly deep because we want to get that silver, a large amount of silver, dumped down into this flask as fast as possible. And so we don't want the silver bottlenecking for any longer than it has to, which is why we're going to make quite a deep, deep funnel. You almost want it to break all the way through, but not quite. All right, so you'll have a little bit of cleaning up to do. You need your sprue hole to be nice and clean, no loose bits of clay. So I like to use my sharp tool and I like to pop it inside of the hole and just run it around, just sort of burnishing that clay down. And I use my paintbrush, I use the back of my paintbrush like a rolling pin, and I just roll around the inside of that funnel, making sure that all of those loose bits of clay are smushed down. We don't want loose bits of clay following our silver into our design because they become horrible bits of porosity that have clay in them, and it's a really nasty, and your design can break at those points, or it'll adhere to the surface of your design. And in my case, that would completely mar my surface because it's got this perfect geometrical sort of shape on it. So it'll be very obvious. When you're doing more textured organic pieces, it doesn't matter so much if your surface gets destroyed, but it does matter if you have clay trapped inside of your silver, because of those like porosity, sandy air pockets, they'll be weak points. And you'd hate it if you gave it to your mum and the ring broke and she'd be disappointed. All right, so the last thing we do before we close this flask up and cast is we need an air vent. We need a way for the air to escape. At the moment, it'll act as like a little pocket, like a stopper. The silver won't be able to get in. It'll sort of hit that air because the air has nowhere to go and it won't travel very well. So if we have an air vent, as the air is escaping out of that air vent, it's actually creating a vacuum. And that silver is rushing to fill the vacuum that air is leaving behind. So we're going to use that to our advantage. And we're going to encourage the silver to travel in places that might be hard to reach. In this design, it's pretty straightforward. The silver is going to come into this point here. It's going to come around the sides. And it's going to crash and meet here. But I really want to encourage it to absolutely crash and meet here. So that's where I'm going to put my air vent. So I like to do just a little line, like a little channel, and then poke all the way out. So it comes out the top here. I don't think you can see that, but it comes out the top here. Your air vents always go on the side that has your sprue hole and funnel. Always. Because if you put it on your male half, if you put it on the side that doesn't have the sprue hole and funnel, you're actually just like putting that down on a table, and then that's blocking the air from escaping. So you always put it on the side that is not face down. All right, so I have my little air vent.
So,
I've
Kirra-Lea,
got
can
my
I just interrupt for a second? I just had a
yeah.
question from Lucy, who asked just about the size of that straw hole that you put in there, the screw hole. Does it
Yeah.
have to be that big?
Yes. So it has to be about 5 to 6 millimeters minimum. You can go bigger, but it does make it harder for you to clean it back. But some designs need it to be bigger. I find that the 5 to 6 mil is pretty much perfect because that allows enough molten silver or metal to travel through that hole before it solidifies and closes up. Because if you imagine the silver, in this case, I'm using silver, so I just refer to the metal as silver. The silver is going to be touching that clay wall, and as soon as it touches it, it solidifies. And from there, it's just getting cooler and cooler and cooler. So that circumference is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller as it cools down. So if you have a straw or a hole maker that is about 5 to 6 mil, that seems to give the silver enough time to travel through there before it solidifies and it's closed. If you have something smaller, you have less time for your metal to move into that flask and fill it. So I find straws are fantastic because they're already a calibrated sort of size, like 5 to 6 mil. So it's pretty safe just using them. You can go bigger, but like I said, it can be a bit of extra work cleaning it up for you.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Kirra-Lea.
That's all right. All right, so I've closed my flask up, lining up those registration marks, which in this case is the giant hole. I'm just patting down the clay. I'm just using my thumb and fingers to just squeeze those two clay halves together, just in case, because we want them to be really flush with each other. Just in case with my fussing, I've made them come apart a little bit, that will create all this spillage. I don't want that. I want like a really clean, crisp casting. So just pressing those two clay halves together. You don't have to go crazy, just a little bit of pressure, just to make sure that they are nice and flush. All right, so if you're looking at my other camera now, you'll be able to see me putting my flask down on my soldering bench. All right, safety glasses on, and make sure you've got a well-ventilated room, or you've got yourself a mask, because it will get smoky. All righty, so this is my crucible and my crucible handle, and I've seasoned my crucible with borax, so I don't have to add any more borax. When it comes to knowing how much metal to use, I just guess. I kind of go, oh, I think I need 10 grams. So let's go for like 15. Let's go for 20. Having more is just a benefit because that extra weight of the metal is just going to force all that silver down inside of your design and make it complete. Having less silver is a problem. So the more the better, but I mean, obviously too much is too much. I'm going for, I don't know if you guys can see that. Not just much. I don't know, it looks like about 30 grams. Alrighty, so I've got my my little mini smith. So we've got gas and oxygen. Red is for gas, green is for oxygen. Alrighty, I'm going to ignite my gas. I'm going to turn it on a little bit, ignite it with the lighter. If your flame is doing this, which is where the fire is not actually touching the tip, bring that flame back. So bring that gas back until that flame is touching the tip again. And then you can introduce your oxygen. If you tried to introduce oxygen while it was big and bold like that, you just blow it out like a birthday candle. All right, I've introduced a little bit of oxygen, makes my flame blue and sharp. I'm going to introduce more gas, more oxygen, more gas. I'm just going to get it to as hot and fast as I can go. And this is a size 7 tip. So nothing fancy. All right, let's go on to the other camera now. I'm going to start melting my silver. You can use scrap metal. As long as you take the springs out of your clasp, you can melt down chains. Where normally you wouldn't be able to do that if you're doing any sort of fabricating. But because we're going to be casting something and it's going to be staying in that final form, we're not going to be doing any forging or anything, you're fine to cast little bits of scraps that do have soldering and things that you would never normally be able to use. You'd have to refine. You can use them when you're doing sand casting.
Oh, Kirra-Lea, there's just a little bit of an issue with the sound when your devices are making some noise and you're speaking at the same time. So we're not quite hearing you as clearly.
Not sure what I can do about that.
You just
Sorry.
was, yeah,
I'll make it quick.
that's right.
Almost there. Not sure if you guys can see. No, can't see. All right. All right, mask on. It's going to get a bit smoky. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, fine. Yep.
Fantastic. So I'm not sure if anybody could hear much of what I was saying. So I decided to stop talking because I think there was an audio problem. But essentially, you want to make your metal as molten as it can be. When you think you've got it melted, hold it there for 10 more seconds. Make sure it is absolutely as hot as it can get. And then bring it on over to your flask, rest it against your flask, angle it so it's about to tip in, but not quite. And you want to dump it down that hole real quick and keep the flame on it the whole time. So it's very important that you're dumping it down the hole. Very important that you keep the flame on it as you dump it down the hole. You want to make sure this metal is as absolutely molten as it possibly can be. Alrighty, so I know I'm touching it. I just cast it and I'm touching it. Isn't that amazing? It's so exciting. It's like Christmas. I get to open it right away. I'm not sure if you can see that detail.
Yeah, we got it.
Fantastic. So if I was to leave this to sit in the clay for a few moments, the heat will disperse through the clay and then through that aluminium flask, and I won't be able to touch it. But because immediately right away, that heat is very contained, and I can just touch it straight away, which is awesome because that's when your interest is at its peak. I've got this dumping tray here because I can't keep the burnt clay. I have to get rid of that, unfortunately, but I can keep the rest of it. So I like to use my tweezers, dig them in on either side of that sprue, and I just lever my casting out. Make sure always to use the metal tools when you're touching your very hot casting. You don't want to melt your tools. All right, I'm just cleaning off all those burnt bits of clay with my little sharp poker. There we go. So that's the sprue and what they call a button. So it's my sprue and button. I can quench this if I wanted to, or I can bench cool it. If you're casting with stones, which sometimes people do, you don't quench your castings, your fresh castings that have stones in them. The stones will break. But if you're just casting something with plain metal, you can quench it. So I'm just cleaning out all the worst of the burnt clay because we can't use that, but the rest of the clay we can reuse. It's pretty simple. I'm just using the back of my tweezers just to scrape it out. All right. And then we can just push all that clay out and we can pack the flask again and make another one. How good's that? So quick. Alrighty. So once that casting cools down, I'll chop off the sprue and I'll reuse it for my next project. I'm just chopping up my clay a little bit because it's all chunky from being in a flask, and I'm just separating it a little bit so it can be smaller pieces. All right, next one. Again, starting with the male, putting clay in the male with the lip down, packing it from behind. We've got our hammer and we're compressing that clay. And I'm using my ruler to cut off any excess clay on the back of that flask. I want it nice and flush. All right, let's tack and powder that surface. And I'm going to show you how to cast a pair of earrings. Doesn't have to be earrings. You can just cast two objects at the same time. If you're feeling like you don't have much time, you want to do things quickly, 2 birds, 1 stone sort of situation. Alrighty, so I'm going to do these 2 little odd shaped things. Again, got them from an op shop. They're pretty much like plastic metal. Alrighty, I'm going to lay them into my flask. I'll lay them in here and then I'll pick it up and show you guys what I do. Push them into halfway. I'm still going to be using this flask in a horizontal manner. All right, so see how I've got the tips of them almost touching, but not quite. That's really important because when you place your sprue hole with your straw, you're going to put it right in between, oh gosh, right in between the 2 of these impressions, so that the metal is being poured in one funnel, one sprue hole, but it's spreading to 2 objects. So you have to have those objects almost touching so that the straw can, the sprue hole can envelop both of those forms. All right, so I've placed them in there. There's talcum powder on that surface. Now I can put my lady on top, my female half. She can only be packed when she's on top of her male partner. She can't be packed separately. All right, I've got some loose crumbly bits of clay. I'm packing that down on my objects. I'm using my fingers to make sure that that clay is tightly packed around those forms. And now I'm just using big handfuls and big chunks of clay to just fill it up. Got my hammer, I'm going to compress it. All right, cutting off all the excess. And let's pull that apart nice and evenly. We're not going to twist it apart, just pull it apart. Fantastic. Like little glasses. All right, let's pull these guys out. It's always a good idea to keep your objects on hand, just in case you do mess up your mold a bit. You can lay your objects back in and tidy it up again. All right. Great impression. So I'm going to use my straw to create a sprue hole. And it's going to be right in between those 2 forms. Right in between the 2. Use my knifey tool to carve a funnel. Now, it's very important for your funnel to be deep, but it doesn't have to be wide. If you want to make it wide, that's fine, because you have to aim for it with molten metal. So the bigger the target, the easier it is to get to. But it doesn't have to be wide, just deep. Deep is the important part. I'm using the back of my paintbrush to rolling pin down any loose bits of clay, just to smush them all down. Use my sharp pokey tool just to run around the inside of that sprue hole, sort of that burnishing that clay, making sure it's absolutely smooth, no loose bits. And let's have a little look at the impression on this side. I did actually disturb it a little bit. So I'm going to pick up my object and I'm going to carefully lay it back in the right way. Organic objects can be quite tricky to find their orientation again. All right, and I'm laying that object back in there and I'm just giving a light little pat and it's just crisping up that form again because I did disturb it a little bit when I did the straw. There we go, beautiful and crispy. All right, so air vent time. Now I really want these two forms to completely form. So I'm going to have two air vents because I want to encourage the silver to come this side and this side. So I'm going to use the vacuum that the air leaves to draw the silver to these far-reaching places. So I'm just going to do two little channels leading off of the furthest parts from the sprue, essentially. Two little channels, and then I just, using my poker, poke all the way through. I like to flip it over and open up those air vents, just in case you accidentally put your flask down and close them up by mistake. All right. So I can see my air vents. That's another little trick. If you're about to cast and you can't see your air vents, don't cast. It probably won't work. So you need to stop, open up your flask again, and make sure those air vents are open. All right, so if you can see here, I've got the air vents here and here. That's all I have to do. So let's close it up and cast. Again, not a bad idea, just to press on that clay really lightly. Obviously avoiding your air vents. You don't want to squash your air vents closed, but it's a good idea just to make sure that your clay is tightly packed and really flush with itself. All right. I'll show you with this casting that's now cold, how to chop that off. With some bolt cutters. Because why break 5 saw blades trying to cut this off when you can just use bolt cutters? All right, these are like from Bunnings or something. Make sure you get the ones with the articulated arms, because it's like power steering for bolt cutters. All right, and I like to use my hip. All right. And there we go, I can remelt that. I mean, you still do have a little sprue thingy, but it's just like when you do any sort of casting, you will have something to clean up. But in this case, I can file that down until it's almost flush with my design, and then I can stamp it on that part, and it looks like I've got a cute little plaque on there, like maybe I saw pierced out a little circle and stamped it and soldered it on there. But I didn't, I cast it in place. All right, so crucible, button, and we're going to melt that. So I'm going to put safety glasses on. I'm going to make sure that metal is piping hot before I cast, and I'm going to hold it at that molten point for about 10 seconds. And then I'm going to take it on over to my flask. I'm going to rest it on the side of the flask. I'm going to angle it so it's about to pour in, but not quite. I'm going to focus that heat on the lip, hold it there for another 5 seconds, and then I'm going to dump it down the hole real quick, making sure I never take the flame off it. We don't want the metal to cool down at all. There we go. Alrighty. Make sure that whenever you're casting, your dominant hand is holding the crucible handle, because you need to have maximum control over the crucible, not the flame. So I usually say whatever hand you brush your teeth with is the hand that you're holding the crucible handle. And you should make sure that you're holding it the entire time that you're melting. It's just a safety thing. You always have to be in control of that molten metal, because that's where the damage is going to happen, not the flame. Alrighty, mask on, because it gets a bit smoky. And again, I can pick it up immediately. All right. If for some reason your flask is like wedged closed and you can't pull it apart, use like a ruler or back of the tweezers. It's got this little lip in here, and you just lever it open. All right. Oh, voila. Beautiful. Using my tweezers. So I like to grab my my casting around where that sprue is, because that's the like the anchor. If I tried to grab my my casting from this end down here, the furthest part from the sprue, I would probably bend my casting trying to get it out of the clay. And that's not what you want to do. You just made something beautiful. You don't want to wreck it. So grab it from the thickest part, the strongest part, which is the part that has the button attached to it. So up here, and using your tweezers, just lever it out. Get your dumping tray. Making sure to use metal tools so that you don't melt them. There we go, it's done, it's out. Actually look like a little pair of lungs. Cool. And again, I could quench that if I wanted to, because there's no stones cast in place. Let's clean out this burnt clay. And I can show you how to use this flask in a vertical way, casting a ring, which is usually what everyone's interested in, because people love rings. I think the reason why jewelers love rings is because clients love to buy them.
Kirra-Lea, when you've got a moment, I've got a few questions for you.
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay,
Shoot.
Here we go. I noticed Kirra doesn't use any fluxing powder on the melted metal.
No, so I use borax. My crucible is seasoned with borax. So the only time I add extra borax to it is if it needs repairing, or if I'm melting down some real skanky old jewelry and it's like full of crap. That's when I'll sprinkle a bit of borax on top of it. But otherwise, I don't need it, because this is fresh metal and my crucible's already lined with it, like glazed with borax.
Excellent. And we've got an ad for you from Tracy Johnson. Great to see you. I recommend everyone come to one of your workshops, and there's so much fun and informative. So there you go.
Thank you.
I came in late. Where do you get the clay from?
So AJS is where you can buy the clay from. So it's called Delft clay, and it comes in a kit that has a flask in it already, and you get 2 kilograms of the Delft clay, and that should last you a long time. It really depends on how much you're chucking away when you're taking your burnt stuff out. So be a little bit cautious not to chuck out your good stuff. There are things on the market like Delft style clay. It's not the same. It's actually Petrobond. It's loose and crumbly, and it's not as good. Like, maybe it'd be good if you want just like a little introduction, but I think perhaps you'd be more frustrated than anything using Delft style clay. So make sure you're getting like actual Delft clay, which AJS does supply. So you know that if you ask for it from them, you're going to get the real thing.
And Erica has actually put a link to that product on our website. So that's great. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.
And I was wondering if there is a limit to how thin a ring you can cast.
Yes. So anything under 2 mil, the silver or the metal seems to struggle to fill, just because it's cooling down so quickly when it gets that thin that it's hard for it to travel when it's that cool. So I'd say wouldn't really suggest a ring that's less than 2 mil by like 1.8 or something like that.
Excellent. Thanks for that question, Antonia, and thanks for the answer, Kirra-Lea. And one more from Ali. What kind of mask were you wearing?
Yes. So I'm wearing this mask from RZ Mask. They're a company in America. I will say though, prior to COVID, I bought their masks and they lasted me 2 years plus before I even had to consider getting a new one. After COVID, I don't know what's happened. They can't get their same materials maybe, but I find the mask is just not as good quality. I know that's not really fantastic to hear. Maybe they'll get better again, but I would just hate it if I said, yeah, it's amazing and you guys got it, and it's not, because their latest material is not as good, unfortunately. So I'm not sure where to tell you where to get a mask from. This one's still, like, it still does everything it's meant to do. It's still protecting you. It just won't last 2 years like their product did before COVID. I don't know. Sorry, I can't give you a right answer. I sort of failed you there.
Thanks, Kirra-Lea. And we do have people wanting to know where you are. And you are, of course, in sunny Melbourne.
Yeah, bright and sunny Melbourne. I don't know if you guys know, but it's like raining and overcast. It usually is, but we might get some sunshine later today. Yeah, so I'm in Melbourne.
Yeah, excellent. So that's all from us for the moment, Kirra-Lea. Back to you.
Fantastic. All right, let's continue on with doing a ring. And this time we're going to use this flask in a vertical fashion. And all flasks that you buy from the Delft clay will come as just like the standard round, horizontal, no hole cut into it. But it's really simple just to modify your flask so that you've got the option of doing both casting styles. You just use some saw frame, just saw blades. Just takes a little bit to cut because it's a funny little angle. You will probably break a few blades just from the angle though. But metal being aluminium, it's really soft and easy to cut. It's just, like I said, the strange angle you got to get on, because you got to be careful not to like cut into the lip as you're trying to cut this part here. You'll figure it out. Alrighty, so let's pack this male side of the flask, making sure it's lip side down as always. And there's our hammer. Let's compress that. Alrighty, using our ruler to take off any extra bits of clay on the back of it. All right, we will talcum powder up that surface. And the ring I will be casting today is just something I've carved out of wax. It's just the green, I don't know, wax tube you can buy from AJS. It sort of comes in this like already partly signet ring style, and you just like cut off what you need and just like shave it to the size you want. And this way, if I spend all my time carving up what I think is the perfect wax, it's not going to get destroyed in this sand casting process. You're not going to lose the wax like you would if you took it to a casting house. So this is fantastic for if you want to put all your hopes and dreams into your wax, and then you can keep using it over and over again. It's amazing. All right, so a little bit different with this one. I'm going to pop the ring in, the wax ring. And I'll show you in a minute. I'm not putting it directly in the middle of the flask like I was doing when I'm doing horizontal. I've actually put it kind of closer to the edge, and I'm putting it closer to that section that I've cut out, because we're actually going to be pouring our metal through here. So we sort of want it closer to where I'm going to be pouring the metal. You don't want it too close though, so keep that in mind. All right, let's put the lady on top, lining up that giant hole. Let's get some loose crumbly bits of clay. With your fingers, push that down around your form, and then handfuls of clay and just compress it. All right, chop off any of the extra. All right, pull it apart nice and evenly. Wonderful. There we are. Let's carefully pull out this wax with some tweezers. I always like to, if I have to pull my object out of the clay, I like to always grab it at a section that I know I'm going to be disturbing anyway. So in this case, I know I'm going to be casting through this point at the back of the shank. So I'm going to grab it with my tweezers up there, because if I disturb the clay, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to like carve a hole there anyway. All right, so I'm going to carefully pull that out. With rings, I always suggest placing your sprue at the shank, at the base of the shank. It's just, you're going to be cleaning up that section anyway. It's at the base of the ring. So if you do make a boo-boo, like you can hide it, it's underneath, people don't look at it. Usually you want to keep the top of your ring a perfect casting. All right, pulled that out. There it is. There's the other side. You guys can't really see this, but in this impression, it picks up so much detail that I can actually see the file marks from when I've carved my wax. The file marks have been picked up on this negative space, so that's an amazing amount of detail. All right, when it comes to sprue holes and funnels, it's pretty much the one thing, okay? There's no straws involved. There's just cutting out a triangle. So I'll cut it out and then show you guys. I like to use my little sharp tool just to carve out that little triangle. See? So the metal can just go straight down there, split and form. You got to do it to the other side too. So the other half. Cut out that little triangle. All right. And again, I like to use the back of my paintbrush just to smooth down all those loose bits of clay. It's very important to get in the habit of doing that. All right, I'm smoothing this one down as well. Now I have sort of disturbed this ring. So I'm going to pop that wax back in there and crisp it up again. Takes like 2 seconds. Wonderful. And I'll do it to the other side too. If for some reason you don't have your object on hand anymore, you've misplaced it, it broke, you can use this embossing tool. It has like little balls on the end of the end of it, and you can go in there and just really lightly fix anything up that you want to. So they're a fantastic tool to have for like repairs, but you can also create texture with these, which is what we're going to learn next week. All right, the last thing we're going to do before we close this flask up and cast is we need an air vent. In this case, doesn't matter which side you put the air vent in, just as long as there is. So it doesn't matter if it's on the male side or the female side, because your flask is not going to be laying down flat. It's not going to be cast horizontal. It's going to be cast vertical. So these sides, the air can escape out of either. I want to put my air vent right there, little channel, poke all the way through. So you don't want to have too many air vents because your vacuum loses its strength. The fewer air vents you can have, the better, because the stronger that vacuum is going to be, the stronger that suction power. Sometimes you do have to do multiple air vents if you're doing a more complex casting. So let's close this up. Let's give it a little bit of a push, these two clay surfaces, just make sure they are absolutely kissing. I don't have any sort of fancy setup when it comes to positioning this in its vertical sense. I just wedge it between some bricks and some old crucibles. I mean, if you wanted to, you could get some sort of fancy device to hold your flask in position. But most of you are probably just starting out and don't want to fork out for all the fancy tools to make your life just a little bit more convenient. Using bricks is just fine. All right, so I'm going to cut off this button, but I'm going to have to add extra metal to it because I know a ring is going to require more metal than what I've got left over from this button. So I think maybe it'll be like a 12-gram ring in the end, but let's just put 20 grams in, or roughly thereabouts. When it comes to casting with wax, there are mathematical equations you can work out, the specific gravity of the wax, and you can convert that to how much that will be in silver, making sure you always add on about 5 grams because you need that extra weight of the button. But when it comes to casting, like things you find at the op shop, there's no way of finding specific gravity for that without filling up a bath of water and doing water displacement. And who's got time for that? Just guess. Alrighty, let's melt. Making sure to keep your metal super duper hot. Alrighty, so I had more metal than I needed, so I didn't put it all in. Put my mask on. And there was a little bit of spillage. So it just poured over the top a little bit. That's okay. It just might mean that your flask is going to heat up quite quickly because the metal is directly touching it. So if you do have a bit of a spill like that, just be a little bit cautious when you're picking up your flask. It might be piping hot. All right. It's super simple to, yeah, it is quite warm. Let me get this towel so I can pick it up and show you. Because getting your casting out is so simple in this vertical flask. So that's it there. It is quite warm because it is touching that aluminium frame. Alrighty, so just grab it. It just pulls out just like that, super nice and clean. That flask is very warm, so I'll just set it aside for it to cool down. I'll clean it out in a little bit. But let's get this casting a little bit more cleaned up so I can show you guys. Getting off the burnt clay. All right, that's it there. So your sprue and button are a bit bigger. So they will be as big as you make them. But it's not too bad to clean up because you can cut it off with the bolt cutters, or it's much easier just to saw pierce it off as you would if you just had a normal casting from a casting house. So let me bring this over to the other camera because maybe you can see. I don't know if you can see that. There's the file marks. The file marks came out in this casting, which is awesome. Not that I need them for this particular design, but it's really cool just to show you guys how fine the detail is that can come out with using Delft clay. I just wish the cameras were a little bit better at seeing. No, you just have to take my word for it. It's there. So again, there's no stones cast in this one, so I could just quench it if I wanted to, but I think I'll just let it cool down. And like I said, you can use the bolt cutters to cut off the bulk of that sprue, or you can just saw pierce it off nice and close to that shank and clean it up as normal. A little bit of the silver did follow that air vent, so I've got this like that little piece of wire. It's easy enough just to lop that off, not a problem at all. Well, that's kind of all the things I was going to demonstrate today. If there's any questions, I could answer those.
Kirra-Lea, there is a couple more. Everyone's really enjoying seeing this live. It's fantastic. So thank you very much for doing that.
Yay.
When placing stones, is there a method to make sure they are secure in the empty space without moving or getting lost in the metal?
Yes, there is. That'll be one of the live demonstrations I do in the future. I won't get too much into it now because it's like a whole thing in itself, but stay tuned for future live classes.
Excellent. Well done. Good advertisement from you there, Kirra-Lea.
Yeah.
And additional to that question, what hardness of stone do you tend to use in casting?
Yep, so 7.5 on the Mohs hardness scale or higher. I personally like to use sapphires. They're usually more affordable, and their hardness of 9. So you pretty much break free every time. The lower on the hardness scale you go, the more breakage you can experience, the less success there is. So garnets are like on there. I think they are 7.5. I've had more garnets break than I've had them succeed. So that's why I tend to stick towards the things that are much harder. You know, like diamonds, pretty much don't break them, but who's got money for that, right? Yeah, sapphires are the best. Or synthetic corundum, which you can buy from stone places. Synthetic corundum is fantastic because you can get all the colors of the rainbow. It's super duper hard. It's the same hardness as sapphire, but without the price tag.
And Kirra-Lea, from Erica, I'm amazed. I'm a dental technician and so used to having to heat soak the casting ring before casting using a centrifugal casting machine. This is so easy in comparison. Thank you so much for this demo. And
you're very welcome.
Thank you, Erica. And Danny produces excellent quality casts. Thanks for the share. So he's impressed with your quality casts.
Yay.
Excellent. So that's just about a wrap then from us for this week.
That's it. Yeah. And next week we're going to be texturing.
Yeah, so that'll be
very similar, but I'll show you how to create your own textures in the clay and how that translates to the metal version.
Oh, we do have another quick question from Erica. Is there ever a problem with porosity in the final casting?
Yes, there can be. So this is not everyone's problem, but if you get your metal too hot, if you boil your metal, it will be riddled with porosity. So if your torch is too hot, it can be a problem. But most people's problem is not having a hot enough torch. Yes, you can have porosity issues. You just got to find the right heat, get the metal to the right temperature so that it's molten enough to cast, but you're not going to be boiling it, so it's not going to be filled with air bubbles.
No worries. Thank you very much for that, Kirra-Lea. So
You're very welcome.
for everyone's information, I'll be putting Kirra-Lea's contact details in this post, so they'll be there for you. And also, this post is there forever on Facebook, but also will be on our YouTube channel and also on our website. So a great resource going into the future. And also, we'll be back again next week to continue with texturing. So
that's right.
We look forward to that moment. Thank you so much for your presentation today, Kirra-Lea. Okay.
Very welcome.
Until next week, we'll see you then, hey?
Bye.
Bye.